Everybody, I'm here with Tim Freke. And Tim, if you don't know, Tim is a teacher, a scholar, an author of some 35 books, deep books. You're one of these guys that has, when I read your bio, it looks like you've lived 4 lives already. He's been awarded as being the 50th most spiritually influential person in the world, according to Watkins magazine, which on one hand sounds a little bit like getting an Oscar, and it's a little bit of an eye roll. But what I wanted to say, it says to me, is that the way that you speak about these matters and the way that you engage with people about these matters is resonating. And I just imagine that feels really, really good, you know, to know that your teaching and your orientation is touching people in that way. So, and you've been doing some very interesting work about the borders between self and unity and community. And it's very interesting to see on deep retreats where people are going into some deep spaces together. So thank you for accepting the invitation. And I wanted to start by just framing the summit that we're in here, this Deep Flow Summit, a little bit. And you know, there's all these ways that people experience flow. It's a loose term. It's a bit mushy, right? But there's the kind of classic flow states that an extreme athlete experiences when they're on the side of the mountain and their life is in danger and their self, you know, disappears because it's any interference from ego might interfere with, you know, their life and death tactics. So there's that kind of a temporary flow state. There's the flow of self-inquiry when people, whether it's in meditation or another type of practice, let something inside them emerge and give them guidance and give them insight, something they're clearly not controlling, but is flowing into them, if you will. There's the creative process, right? Now, there are nuances between these, but the creative process, which could be said to be everything, but the creative process is when you just allow yourself to be taken by something and so on. So we're here in this summit exploring those perspectives, many others. And for starters, I wanted to just ask you just a big open question, how you frame flow. And then we're going to kind of get into some of the ways that you think about this. And then we'll leave people with some what you can do about it.
Well, firstly, it's very important to me. My work is primarily these days doing philosophy. And that's flow. I mean, when it happens, I mean, if I'm not in that flow, it's really hard. So a lot of time is spent cultivating a flow state, a bit like an athlete would, very much like that. You know, if you follow a sport, I watch football in the UK, soccer, you call it, and you see, you know, an athlete can be in it one day and not in it the next, or in it for 6 months and then not. And you can see, and as somebody who's trying to do the same thing but with ideas in a deep way, I'm constantly trying to cultivate it. But the way I've come to think about it has radically changed, Jeff, through that process, through the process of flow. And I'm happy to give you an idea of how I see the flow, if that feels right.
Yes, I'd love to hear that. Yes.
So the first thing I want to do is I want to just say that my ideas around consciousness have changed. So it seems to me that what consciousness is, or what it is to be conscious, is to pay attention and process something in, you could call it high definition. So I see that right now, for instance, I'm taking in a huge amount of information in my senses, but also in the psyche, and I'm choosing to process a tiny, tiny amount of it, which is you on my screen and what I'm saying. And that is vivid and in high definition. And then everything else is kind of, it's not conscious. So I wasn't conscious of my left foot. I doubt you were, but now I've said left foot. Everyone listening to that is probably now conscious of their left foot because their attention's gone there. So it seems to me, and this is an idea you'll find in people like Carl Jung and so forth, that it's what we pay attention to. Now, one of the things which we can do, which has made us so powerful, is we can imagine and we can reflect on what we're doing so that I can stop and think about what I'm going to say to you. I'm not doing that, actually. I'm just saying it. And the reason I'm just saying it is that this is flowing right now. But if I wanted to, I could stop and reflect. Oh, is that a good idea to say that to Jeff? Or Jeff is answering me a question I may need. Or the whole time, that ability to choose is to imagine different possibilities and act on them. That is it's like a superpower, which allows us, but we pay a high price because it takes energy and it takes time. So there's a combination of the immediacy of doing and then the stepping back and reflecting. And I think they're both really important. But what you see, say with an athlete, is that they are spending a huge amount of time in training, which is a lot about reflection. Do it slightly differently. Can you see that didn't work? Do it like this, do it like this. Or like a musician. I'm a musician, or I was really. And you a lot of time doing that. But then when you play, you want to flow. But how well you will flow is going to be also governed by how well you've reflected previously. So when I get to share ideas like I'm doing now, I hope to flow because I've thought about these ideas over and over and over and tried to iron out all the problems so I can just flow with them. So then what you get then is, so flow is actually something that's happening all the time. We just don't notice it. I flow when I drive a car on a very low level. It's quite easy for me. I can have a conversation, listen to music, and have eat a sandwich at the same time. I couldn't when I learned it. I had to focus. Now I don't. So the reason I'm saying this is I think for me what's happened is I now think about it. I now think about everything as one process of evolution in which it seems like it's been going on for 14 billion years, which is quite impressive. And it's got us from hydrogen to you and me having a conversation. And that process has taken us through matter to life to psyche, and here we are talking. And then the psyche itself is also entering more and more emergent states. So for me, it's like, I can flow on these low emergent states. I can walk without thinking about it. I can drive pretty much. But if I want to enter these, if I want to flow on a very highly emergent state, I need to learn how to do that. So if I want to be able to think philosophical thoughts at a very high level of flow, then I have to find how to do that. Or if I want to guide people, or if I want to make music on that level, it's not just going to happen because inside me there's an innate ability to make music. There is, sort of, but it's going to take me to reflect and to grow and evolve, and then I can. And then when you hit those emergent states of flow, there's no wasted energy on reflection. So it just happens, and it's exquisite and very creative.
Yeah, well put. So clearly you had to practice a lot before you could pick up your guitar. Was it a guitar?
Eventually, it was also other instruments too, but guitar. Yeah, yes.
So clearly you have to practice. If I get into a flow state, I cannot play the saxophone. I've never picked one up, right? So that clearly that kind of reflection has to happen. And clearly the kind of reflection that you've done, for example, about all of these topics that we'll discuss, has prepared you to get into a flow state to let that come. You couldn't just start from scratch and have this conversation. But the same mechanism that we reflect with, that same one that uses our energy and filters our experience and where we put our attention and so on, that same mechanism kind of keeps people out of flow, it seems to me, in a certain way when they get too caught up in it. So in other words, if a person gets up on stage and they even know their material, but they get too self-conscious and too worried about how they'll appear, they're not going to kind of flow, even though they have the material, because they can't shake free from that kind of grab onto the mind.
Yeah, because they're paying attention to the wrong thing.
So this
so it's like in meditation where the mind gets a very bad rep. I've spent 2 whole years just doing nothing much but meditating, and the mind gets, so actually what's all the problem is you've chosen to pay attention to one thing and you keep paying attention to the other thing. So thoughts are great, but they can be. They're neither one thing or the other. They can be great. They can be worries. They can be repetitive. They can be really negative. Because thinking is essentially imagining talking, but just to yourself. So just like you can have a conversation with somebody, it can be wonderful or it can be horrible. The same with yourself. So where you then choose to put your attention. So when you play your sport, you get, I used to do stand-up philosophy, which is very much like stand-up comedy, and you have to be right there. And what does that mean? It means you're paying attention to the most important thing, which is what you're going to say and the people you're saying it to. And if you're right there with them, you're going to be at your best. If you're distracted into, am I any good, or any other thing, which you're not there. Now, that's not because thinking's bad. It's just because not now. Now is the time to just engage and let the magic happen. And the magic happens in that relationship, it seems to me, between you speaking and the person listening.
You're talking about this shift as a shift of attention and where we choose to put our attention. So let's say that person is on stage and they're about to start speaking, and they know they've reflected and they know their topic very well, but they're a little bit, wound up about how they appear. Now they're in that circumstance. Are you suggesting that they can take their attention and choose to put it elsewhere other than, like, do you see people can just take their attention out of that kind of nervous self-consideration and so on?
That's exactly what a good comic learns to do, or a good philosopher. When I present, I want to be absolutely not, I want to reflect if someone asks me a question, so I can go, I don't know the answer, or I can say, for instance, but while I'm presenting, I just want to find that flow, which means I'm in the most emergent overall state my psyche can get into, and the most awake I can be, to put it in a different, more traditional language. And I'm allowing the greatest wisdom I've got to hand to communicate with these particular people or this particular person. And that's it. The more I can do that, the better it is. Although it occurs to me, I want to introduce a different idea. And I don't want to make this premature, because obviously there's so much more to say about that. But I also, it seems important to me from my experience, there's another type of flow, which you could call magical flow, where it's not just like Tim as a system is functioning at his best, or is able to access deeper, the most emergent aspect of himself, but actually there's a flow in the relationship with life, such that the whole conversation between me and what's happening to me is in flow. And people have had that, you have asynchronicity, and it's like, oh, but then you have another one and another one and another one and another one. And suddenly it's like, oh, what is happening now? We're in a whole magical conversation can be between you and another person, but it can also be between you and events that happen. And one of the things which fascinates me about sport is you can easily see a player who's in the flow that day and everything, but then you also see they're in the luck, which is why they're so superstitious, why they all have their little superstition, because there's just one day where everything works for them. The ball just lands at their feet, and they just knock it in the net. It's like they can't just, whatever they do, it's just going to work. And not because they're just playing well, but just because everything is working in their direction. And that's another really interesting mystery about flow.
That's very interesting, especially coming from a philosopher. Because that is one that has not been well packaged in the culture, right? That can easily appear to be, kind of woo-woo thinking. And
yeah.
How do we think this universe works anyway? And why do we think the universe is paying attention to our feet and all of that?
One of the things I'm trying to do, Jeff, very much with philosophy, the part of me that works on ideas, is to go, look, I need a rational, post-scientific, meaning it includes science within it, way of understanding how the universe can be like that, because I have no doubt that it is. So the question is, how? How can the universe be such that those flows of magic happen? And I don't know about you, but I mean, most of the people I know have experienced them. It's not like it doesn't happen. It happens a lot.
Yes, strange things happen, do they?
On a regular basis. And you can also, as you enter these more emergent states of the psyche or soul, then life becomes more like that. It takes on a more dreamlike quality.
I want to kind of extend that a little bit further, and maybe we'll have some loose ends to circle back to, but I
Yeah.
want to extend that a little bit further into the difference between, say, being a trained athlete or a trained artist and having a skill, or a trained philosopher and having done the reflection, and then being able to get into a flow that day and let it rip without interference. There's that experience. But then there's the experience that in general, there seem to be qualities that humans can tap into, deeper qualities: compassion, love, joy, wisdom. I mean, I know so many people who they experience regularly that they're their wisest as a surprise to them. You probably experience it too, that you're
All the
teaching
time.
away and you're like, man, I wish I was that smart, right? That's a great, that's a perfect insight. And it just so it seems like, in addition to the preparation and reflection, it seems like there are these unconditioned qualities that human beings have the potential to tap into when we can kind of, not grab onto this. Maybe you could think of it in terms of attention, when we put our attention there, but we have to have an orientation of allowing it to emerge as opposed to making it happen, right? Something like that.
I certainly think, one of the big changes for me, Jeff, has been that I've adopted and I'm exploring a radical evolutionary philosophy in which everything is anything which has any quality at all, any form whatsoever, is one process of formless being, if you will, being informed with information and forming different information systems, which on this level of amazement is you and me. And so for me, I've dumped the idea that there's some perfect Tim essence which has all these qualities already. I just need to find it. It feels the opposite. It feels like, no, it's not there and I forgot it. It's actually emerging. It's evolving. It's growing like everything else. And that what I'm tapping into at those times is the most emergent levels that Tim can get access to. And it surprises me. And when I touch those levels, it feels more everything, more real, more wise, more compassionate. And also, because if I look at who in my identity, it seems that I'm not, on any level, not just on the emergent levels, on every single level that I exist, I am not Tim. I am Tim in relationship with the universe, because there's never a time when I'm not. It's like Tim doesn't exist on his own. And so it looks, and as I am also arising from the universe, I could say I am the universe in relationship to itself as Tim, and you are the relationship of the universe to itself as Jeff. And so that on every level, there's a universal aspect to our identity as well. And on the psyche, I think we tap into collective states where you can discover these deep wisdom that you didn't know you had. And in some way, you might not have had it before. You might just have found it for the first time and touched into something which had been left there for you to discover.
The perspective of everything being one, fill in the blank, formless entity, or being. It's hard to finish that sentence. Emerging, evolving, not only through us but as us.
As us. As is the key. That's the key word. As us. As everything.
Right. So right now, this is the universe chatting to itself through Zoom across the Atlantic Ocean, and it is miraculous. It's just unbelievable.
It really is.
Yeah. And all right, so it's too tempting at this moment. I have to circle back to a note I made earlier, but you were talking about paying attention. I mean, that the flip side of that is we have filters. Why aren't I aware of my left foot now? It's just, for whatever reason, the way this works, people could frame it in terms of survival or functioning or whatever, but the way that this works, I don't need to pay attention to my left foot. It goes away. But why that's interesting, or most interesting, is because the awareness of what we were just talking about goes away. And this, any given moment, is as miraculous as any moment could possibly be. And yet our awareness just gets I use the word filtered, but we filter out almost all of our possible perception just to deal with this, not as a conscious choice, but as an unconscious background activity that people don't see as happening.
Yeah, and that's a good thing, Jeff. I think it is a good thing, and I think it's arisen, as you said, it's arisen with the evolution of life, because as the senses arose, organic systems were taking in so much information, enormous, as we are right now, enormous amount of information, most of which doesn't matter, and a tiny, tiny bit of it could be life or death. So that ability to focus is what's given us this incredible HD experience we're having. So then it becomes like, so for me, it feels like it's not about being more conscious, which was a phrase I used to use when I was younger. It's being back conscious of more. That I have the ability to shift my attention to these more emergent states when I choose to, more often, so that I can pay attention to the minutiae of life, which I need to, otherwise I'll be in trouble. But I don't lose access to these other states when my attention moves. Just as wasn't paying attention to my left foot, but I didn't lose access to it. As soon as I moved my attention, there it was. And that we have to cultivate, or I felt like I needed to cultivate, these more emergent states of awakening to the point where I could find them when I place my attention on them.
Yes.
And with the flow states the same. Now, I think they are still they are still tricky. If I could turn it on every day, it'd be great. But I think understanding it in an evolutionary picture really helps me, because it doesn't feel like, oh, I failed again, or I'm I'm looking at this wrong thing, or it's like, no, I am in the process of evolving. I'm an evolving psyche or soul, and I am learning how to place my attention on what are very emergent states. And because they're not familiar, that's tricky. But as I do it, it becomes easier. And that's definitely true. I can pay attention. My experiences in meditation, for example, are completely beyond what I would have hoped for when I was 20 and 15 when I started.
You talk about paying attention, and people have an option of paying attention to their left foot or to the wonders of the universe or to the business at hand, and that it's a good thing, as we, it enables us to have this universe, this world here on earth that we have with our reasonable functioning. And but there's this other frame, which is that a kind of self sense gets formed in thought that takes on a life beyond what it really is, and that it becomes an obstacle, and that people need to have enough clarity about the nature of how that works to be able to turn their attention elsewhere, right? To be like, they have to see that the way that they get absorbed in thought, and the way that they get that their perception narrows to this little place, in order to let other capacities emerge and flow more spontaneously. So I don't want to just jam different language systems.
No, I hear you. And it's a very common idea. I don't like it.
Tell me why. I'm curious.
I don't like it because I think it does more harm than good. And it sets up a kind of battle inside yourself, which is unnecessary. And that there's something bad in you which is trying to stop you. I can remember being taught with meditation, like I had my ego who really didn't want me to meditate because it was so frightened it would die and be destroyed, because that was the aim. And it was like, whoa. And for years I struggled with that. And I don't think any of that's true. I think what's happening is much more organic, if you like, or evolutionary, that Tim's an evolving thing, a soul, let's say. And part of that is there are things that limit me, and I'm habitual, and that's good and bad. And there's some habits which form the foundation from which I can go to more emergent states, and there's some which keep pulling me back. So what I would say is not, oh, there's something inside you. To me, it's like, look, have a look at who you are. That's how it feels to me. And if you discover that you are actually one with everything, in relationship with everything, and yet you are this particular expression, that allows you to change your self-orientation so that you're not just focused on yourself. And this universal love or universal benevolence starts to arise from that state. So if you tune into these simple realizations, your response changes. The ideas that will come up in you will change by and large. Old stuff will happen again. But as you become more awake, you notice it. Oh, it's not like, oh, it's like, no, that way of thinking doesn't serve me, does it? I want to shift that. And then by reflecting, actually, by stopping, this is the bit where it takes a lot of energy, and you kind of step back, don't you, and look at yourself, and then you can make changes because you're watching it. It's not just happening. So it's almost like you stop the flow because it's a negative flow now. So by stopping the negative flow, you can change it into a positive flow. That seems a better way to deal with it to me than to have the whole sort of ego idea.
Yes, the ego idea is kind of an ego-based idea, right? And it sets up conflict where people think,
It's
and they
kind of
end up
inner
having, conversations with inner pep talks and debates, and one part's trying to overpower the other part, and you work it out for a day, and then the other one comes back, and so that whole world is not anything to aspire toward, to celebrate. Although I share your perspective that it's not a mistake. It's not some horrible thing that we need to go to war with, because that would just be more of that part of our mind going to war with itself, right? But so what I think I hear you saying is that we have an opportunity to just kind of, by taking on this larger perspective, this larger evolutionary perspective, seeing ourselves as as the whole. In the way that we spoke earlier, as an emergence of that, including the mind, that orientation sets us in a frame of being that allows us to flow more freely, because we're just naturally kind of open to more influences or something
beautiful.
like that.
Yeah, beautifully put. I mean, there is something mind-blowing about the idea that literally the universe was mainly just hydrogen, and now it's you and me having a conversation like this.
What do you do? What do you do with an idea like that?
It's like, okay, so if you can get that, and that is our modern scientific explanation, and it's not based on nothing, it's based on an extraordinary amount of evidence, then, and you see yourself now as an intrinsic part of that, in fact, not only a part of it, but as an example of the leading edge of that 14 billion years, because there's no doubt that the latest thing to arrive is psyche or soul. This non-material experience we're having, where we're sharing meaning right now. It opens up like, wow, well, where's this going to go? So, and then when you see yourself in an evolutionary picture, you go, well, of course, there's going to be things in me like there is in my body. There's going to be things which I've developed at different levels, which can be beneficial or not, and that I need to engage with it in a creative way. And when you do that, then it feels like, okay, well, what's the new thing that's arising? What's the most emergent thing? This is my idea of what I call a unividual, that something, I want to talk about history a lot to people, because I feel like when we don't know our history, we don't know how far we've come, not just like the 14 billion years, but the human history. And one of the big things that's happened over the last 400 years, let's say, is the emergence of a modern individual, which just wasn't there before in the same way. We've moved out of being a kind of a collective species into being more and more and more and more individual. And it's been fantastic, I think. But there's a dark side, and which lots of people are aware of, so I won't go into that. But what I'm left with is, well, where are we going to go next? Because it sure isn't going to stay like this, because it keeps moving. So where is the next jump? And my guess is that these emergent states, which gets called spiritual awakening, this recognition of oneness with the universe, will be the next common jump. And which is what I mean by a unividual, an individual conscious of that universal benevolence I mentioned, conscious of the universal being of everything, the oneness of being, conscious of these higher levels. So the individual becomes a unividual. And one of the things which I think accompanies that is a higher level of flow. So like I said, I can flow on low levels. I just don't even notice it. It's so easy for me. I want to flow on the high levels, because when I do that, I really notice. And that's fantastic. And so it's about, and as we do that, maybe we can cultivate, all of us, being able to flow on those levels, which I hope will open up more levels that we can't even dream of.
Yes, the universe emerges, it arises as Tim and Jeff. We each have our own personal sense of things. And if we kind of contract a little bit, I can be very Jeff and you can be very Tim. But if we relax a little bit and we remember that we are alive as the universe and things open up more, then you're talking about this emergent sense of not being quite as individual, but being more part of the same whatever.
Yeah, although I think there's a kind of paradox there in my experience, Jeff, because in some ways I feel even more individual. And yet, at the same time, there's a universal element to my identity and something which is still individuating, where I'm the particularness of this relationship, which is me. I am a relationship. That's the way it looks to me. I am this relationship, and I'm the universe working out this relationship, and you're the universe working out that relationship. And what we have mainly to do it with is our ideas. Hence this sort of conversation where we'll share ideas and hopefully both walk away from it richer for the exchange.
So where these conversations are too short always, and we're sort of winding up. But I wanted to just get to something that you just said that kind of went over my head a little bit, but you were talking about why flow increases in this perception of unividualism.
Yeah.
Can you say something else about that? And that might lead
I think the key,
how they can move forward. Yeah.
The key thing I think I want to get across in this conversation, and it's been lovely actually, Jeff, because I feel like I'm clarifying it myself as I talk to you, which is always my favorite thing. Going, oh yeah, so I don't feel I've been that prepared. But what I'm trying to say is, look, as human beings evolve, just think about growing up. You learn to flow on new levels. So, you can't walk, and then you can, and you flow with such ease, you don't even think about it. You can run, you can catch, you can do. It's all of that function becomes you establish it. Not always, sometimes you fall, but generally you don't. And your expectation then moves to another level of emergence. Can I function on this level of intellectual emergence at school, say, or whatever? And that as you go up these levels, the lower levels, you don't even notice them anymore. And what we tend to call flow in that kind of excited way is the really emergent levels that we're not established on. So that when we hit them, we go, whoa, or the really emergent relationship whereby life is emergent too. Life is magical, all of that. And you hit those, what was that? And then they're so special, you tell people about them. Oh, I had one when I was 25, or, people come to my retreats and they've captured all these events where it happened. So then you're like, okay, I'm learning to flow on this new level. So the unividual is somebody who is learning how to live on this new level. So that's why the flow they experience is a more emergent level of flow, both the magical flow and the let's say the competence flow, if you like, what you can do, because you're touching into the most emergent level of the evolving universe, which is quite extraordinary.
And some of these emerging qualities that I tried to force into conversation earlier, like compassion and love and things which I didn't figure out, and they seem to come from nowhere.
Can I share an enormous idea? Have I got time?
Yes, we're gonna stretch it. It's worth it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is going to just drop for our listeners, but hopefully they've got enough idea about how I'm seeing things. I'll just say it bluntly and see how it lands. One of the big changes for me is since I've been a little boy, my awakenings have been an experience of connecting with something greater than me. Traditionally, you call that God. And God is seen to be at the beginning of things, the creator, the great whatever that's doing it all. But as I got older, especially in my later life, none of that made any sense for all sorts of philosophical reasons. For instance, why is there so much suffering in the world? Classic one, the existence of evil. Why is evolution so chaotic? 5 complete extinctions. It's like, it doesn't seem to be very wise. Why must we have those little things that eat babies' brains from the inside? That just seems unnecessary. So this idea of somebody running the show or creating it makes no sense. But I experience this greater than me. I experience this incredible wisdom and compassion, which is what you're describing. And when I do, it's the most important experience I have. So what I'm exploring is the idea that if everything has come from the simplest qualities to the most emergent, that more emergent presence that is traditionally called God, I call it universal soul, is not at the beginning, it's what we're growing into. And that what a universal is, what an individual is in its deepest aspect, is an individual communing with universal soul, which I experience as this incredible universal benevolence, this big love. And that's why I think when we hit those very, very emergent flow states, you just feel like, wow, where did that come from? Because you're actually communing that God is a communion of souls. It's arising as we commune, this greater thing is arising. A bit like I look at my body and I think, isn't it a miracle that it somehow all those individual cells came together to form this communion of cells that's Tim? And in the same way that individual souls are coming together to form a communion of souls, that's a universal soul or God.
Unfortunately, we have to leave it. We have to leave it there. But it was well put, and you said a big thing there about your not only how you see things, but how you live, and I very much appreciate it. So people can find out more about your work, about your writings, about your online and live courses below. They'll be able to sign up for your list and so on. And wow, that was a nice tour. A tour of reality. There we go.
It was great, Jeff. I really enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you, Tim.